Have you ever stood in a room full of people who share the same last name, your blood, your family tree, and felt like you didn't belong? Like every smile in that room was meant for someone else. Every hug skipped right past you. Every conversation got a little quieter when you walked up. Now imagine that feeling, that deep, gut-level loneliness, and multiply it by the worst thing you could ever hear come out of your own father's mouth. In front of everyone, 40 relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, people you grew up seeing at cookouts and holidays, people whose approval you quietly craved your entire life, even though you never said it out loud. And your father, the one man on this earth who was supposed to protect your name, stands in the middle of that room, looks at you, and says, "You're my mistake." Not in a whisper, not in a private conversation behind a closed door. No, he said it loud enough for every single person in that room to hear it. Like he wanted them to hear it, like he'd been waiting to say it. And what happened next? Silence. 40 people, and not one of them opened their mouth. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine what that does to a woman? To a black woman who already spent her whole life fighting to feel like she was enough? What would you do in that moment? Would you cry? Would you scream? Would you just leave? Because Denise almost did. She almost grabbed her purse, walked out that front door, and never looked back. She almost let that man have the last word, the way he always did, the way he'd been doing her entire life. But here's the thing. That night that nobody in that family saw coming, Denise had something on her phone, something she'd been carrying for weeks, something she told herself she would never use because she wasn't that kind of person. She wasn't petty, she wasn't vengeful. She was the girl who always took the high road, always swallowed her pain, always smiled through the disrespect because she thought, maybe if I'm good enough, maybe if I'm quiet enough, maybe if I just keep showing up, he'll finally love me. But those texts on her phone, they were from her wife, Lorraine, the woman who had been whispering in her father's ear for over 20 years, the woman who controlled every narrative, who decided who was family and who wasn't, who smiled in Denise's face at Thanksgiving and then sent messages behind her back that would make your stomach turn. And what those texts revealed? It didn't just expose Lorraine, it unraveled everything, every lie, every manipulation, every reason Denise's father treated her like she was nothing. And when Denise read those texts out loud in front of all 40 of those relatives, the room didn't just go quiet, it erupted. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because to understand why that night mattered, to truly feel what Denise felt standing in that room, you have to understand where she came from, what she carried, and how long she'd been breaking, in silence, waiting for a love that was never coming. So let me take you back to the beginning. Denise was born in a small apartment in Baltimore. No nursery waiting for her, no father pacing the hospital hallway, no balloons, no celebration. Just her mother, a 19-year-old girl named Teresa, lying in a hospital bed alone, holding a baby she already loved more than anything in this world, but terrified because she had no idea how she was going to raise her. Denise's father, Marcus, was 23 when Denise was born. He and Teresa had been together for about a year. Nothing serious in his eyes, but serious enough for Teresa to believe he'd stay. Serious enough for Teresa to think that when she told him she was pregnant, he'd step up. He didn't. When Teresa told Marcus she was having his baby, he didn't yell, he didn't argue. He did something worse. He just pulled away. Slowly, quietly, like smoke. One week he was calling every day, the next week it was every few days, then once a week, then nothing. By the time Denise came into this world screaming and gasping for air, Marcus had already started dating someone else, Lorraine. And that's where everything changed, because Lorraine wasn't just a new girlfriend. Lorraine was a woman with a plan. She was older than Teresa, more established, more strategic. And from the very beginning, she made one thing very clear to Marcus. If he wanted to be with her, his past had to stay in the past. And by past, she meant Teresa, and by Teresa, she meant Denise. Now, Marcus never fully disappeared. That's what made it so painful. He didn't vanish completely, because that would have been easier in some ways. At least then Denise could have told herself a clean story. My father left, period, end of sentence. But no, Marcus was the kind of absent father who showed up just enough to keep the wound open. A birthday card every other year, a random phone call on Christmas that lasted 4 minutes, a $20 bill stuffed inside an envelope with no letter. Just enough to remind him he existed, just enough to make her wonder, does he care about me at all? And if he does, why doesn't he show up? Teresa did everything she could to fill that gap. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She braided hair on the weekends for extra cash. She walked Denise to school every single morning, no matter how tired she was. And she told her the same thing every single day at the school gate. You are not what people say you are. You are what God made you to be. Denise would nod and smile and walk inside like she believed it. But the truth is, every time she saw another girl's father pick her up from school, something inside her cracked a little more. By the time Denise was 8, Marcus had married Lorraine. They had 2 kids together, a boy named Elijah and a girl named Tiana. And here's what broke Denise's heart more than anything. Marcus was a good father to them. He showed up to their games, he took them on vacations, he posted pictures of them on social media with captions like, "My whole world and everything I do is for these 2. And Denise saw every single one of those posts. Every single one. Can you imagine being a child and scrolling through your own father's page and seeing him love other children the way you've been begging him to love you? Seeing him smile with them the way he never smiled with you? Seeing him call them his world when he couldn't even call you on your birthday? That does something to a child. It plants a question deep down inside that grows louder every year. The question isn't, why doesn't he love them? The question is, what's wrong with me? And Denise carried that question everywhere. She carried it to middle school, where she was one of the only black girls in her class and already felt invisible. She carried it to high school, where she overachieved in everything. Honor roll, student council, volleyball captain. Not because she loved all of it, but because somewhere deep down, she believed that if she was impressive enough, if she was perfect enough, maybe word would get back to her father and he'd finally say, "That's my daughter." She carried it to college, where she studied pre-law on a scholarship and called her mother every night, but never once called Marcus because she was terrified of hearing his voicemail again. That robotic tone, the beep, the silence after. She'd rather not call at all than feel that rejection one more time. But even through all of that, even through the silence and the absence and the constant ache, Denise never said a bad word about her father. Not once. Teresa raised her that way. Don't carry bitterness, baby. It'll eat you alive. And Denise listened. She buried the pain so deep that most people in her life didn't even know it was there. Her friends thought she was confident. Her coworkers thought she was unshakable. Her boyfriend at the time told her she was the strongest woman he'd ever met. But late at night, when the apartment was quiet and there was nobody to perform for, Denise would sometimes sit on the edge of her bed and just feel it. That hollow space in her chest where a father's love was supposed to live. And she'd whisper to herself the same question she'd been asking since she was 6 years old. Why wasn't I enough? She never got an answer. And then, 26 years after being born into a world that her father never fully welcomed her into, Denise got a phone call that changed everything. It was from her half-sister, Tiana. Marcus and Lorraine's daughter, the golden child, the one in all the pictures, the one who got the life she was supposed to have. And what Tiana told her on that phone call, Denise was not ready for. Not even close. Tiana's voice was shaking when she called, and that alone was enough for Denise's stomach to drop. Because Tiana was not the type to shake. She was Marcus's confident one, the daughter who grew up with everything Denise didn't have: stability, presence, a father who actually showed up. So when Tiana called Denise out of nowhere on a random Tuesday evening, sounding like she'd been crying for hours, Denise knew something was very wrong. They weren't close, let's be real about that. Denise and Tiana had met maybe a handful of times over the years. Awkward family run-ins, a couple of forced holiday dinners where Lorraine made sure Denise felt like a guest instead of family. Tiana was always polite, but distant. Not cruel, just careful, like she'd been taught to keep Denise at an arm's length without ever being told exactly why. And Denise never blamed her for that. How could she? Tiana was a child raised inside a version of the story that Lorraine had written. And in Lorraine's version, Denise was the outsider, the inconvenience, the reminder of a past that was supposed to stay buried. So when Tiana called that night, Denise almost didn't answer. She saw the name on her screen and hesitated for a good 5 seconds, because every time she let someone from that side of the family into her space, she ended up hurt. Every single time. But something told her to pick up. Something she couldn't explain. A gut feeling, a whisper, whatever you want to call it. She answered. And the first thing Tiana said was, "Denise, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen, because if I stop talking, I don't think I'll be able to start again." Denise sat down slowly on her couch. Her heart was already racing. She said, "Okay." And then Tiana started talking. Tiana told Denise that things at home had been falling apart for a while. Marcus and Lorraine's marriage was cracking. Arguments every other night, slamming doors, cold silences that stretched for days. Tiana said she'd been staying out of it, minding her own business, trying to focus on her own life. But about 3 weeks ago, something happened that she couldn't ignore. Tiana had borrowed Lorraine's iPad to look something up, and when she opened it, the Messages app was still logged in. Lorraine's iMessages synced across her devices, and Tiana saw a thread that made her blood run cold. It was a conversation between Lorraine and her best friend, a woman named Pamela. And in that conversation, Lorraine said things that Tiana could barely repeat out loud. Lorraine had been talking about Marcus. Not with love, not with respect, with contempt. She called him weak. She called him easy to control. She said, and this is a direct quote from the texts, "I've had that man wrapped around my finger since day one. He does whatever I tell him. All I had to do was get rid of that girl and her broke mother, and he fell right in line." That girl. She was talking about Denise. Denise felt her chest tighten. She couldn't speak. She just held the phone to her ear and let Tiana keep going, because if she opened her mouth, she was going to scream or cry or both. But it got worse. Tiana said the texts went back months, and in those messages, Lorraine admitted to things that completely rewrote the history Denise had been living with her entire life. Lorraine told Pamela that years ago, when Denise was still a child, she intercepted cards and letters that Marcus tried to send. She told Pamela that she was the one who convinced Marcus to stop calling. She told him Teresa was toxic and unstable, and that any contact with Denise would only drag him down. She manufactured a wall between Marcus and his firstborn daughter, brick by brick, year after year, until the distance felt normal. Until Marcus stopped feeling guilty, until he actually started believing that walking away from Denise was the right thing to do. And the worst part? Lorraine didn't even feel bad about it. In the texts, she laughed about it. She sent laughing emojis. She told Pamela, "Girl, I did what I had to do to protect my family," as if Denise wasn't also his family, as if a child can be erased just because she's inconvenient. Denise was shaking now, her whole body trembling on that couch in her living room. 26 years. 26 years of wondering what was wrong with her. 26 years of thinking her father didn't love her because she wasn't lovable. 26 years of blaming herself for a silence that was manufactured by a woman who saw her as a threat before she learned how to read. Tiana was crying on the other end of the phone. She kept saying, "I'm sorry, Denise. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." And Denise believed her, because her voice was broken in a way you can't fake. Then Tiana said something that made Denise's blood stop moving in her veins. "There's more." Denise whispered, "What do you mean there's more?" Tiana told Denise that in the same text thread, Lorraine also admitted to something else, something that had nothing to do with Denise at all, something about Lorraine's own life that she had been hiding from Marcus for years. Lorraine had been having an affair, not a recent one, a long one, years, with a man from her church, the same church she dragged Marcus to every Sunday, the same church where she sat in the front pew with her hands raised, praising God, while living a complete lie behind her husband's back. And Lorraine told Pamela about it casually, like it was nothing, like it was just another part of her week. Tuesday, I get my nails done. Thursday, I see David. Sunday, I go to church with Marcus. That's how normalized it was in her mind. Denise couldn't breathe. This woman who spent 2 decades making Denise feel like she was the stain on her father's life, this woman who positioned herself as the righteous wife, the good Christian, the moral center of the family, this woman was a fraud, a manipulator, a liar in every possible direction. Tiana told Denise she had screenshots of everything, every single message, and she asked Denise a question that hung in the air like smoke. "What do you want to do with them?" And that question sat on Denise's chest for the next 2 weeks. Because now she had the truth. She had it right there in her hands, saved on her phone, forwarded from Tiana's screenshots, enough truth to blow Lorraine's entire world apart, enough truth to make her father see exactly who she married, enough truth to rewrite the story that had been suffocating Denise since childhood. But using it? That was a different thing entirely, because Denise wasn't raised like that. Teresa raised her to be graceful, to take the high road, to let God handle the people who wronged her. And part of Denise believed that. Part of her thought, maybe I should just let it go. Maybe I should walk away from this family for good and build my own peace somewhere far from these people. But there was another part of her, a deeper part, a part that had been silenced for 26 years. And that part was tired of being the bigger person, tired of swallowing her pain so other people could be comfortable, tired of being the one who always had to forgive while nobody ever had to apologize. And then the invitation came. Marcus was turning 60. Lorraine was growing him a big birthday celebration. Family from everywhere was coming. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people Denise hadn't seen in years. 40-plus relatives all gathering in one place to celebrate the man who once told a 19-year-old girl that he'd be there for their daughter and then let his wife erase that daughter from his life. And here's the part that made Denise's jaw tighten. She wasn't invited. Tiana told her about it. Tiana even asked Lorraine why Denise wasn't on the list, and Lorraine's response was, "She's not really part of this family, Tiana. Let's not make your father's birthday about drama." Not really part of this family. That sentence echoed in Denise's head for days. She heard it when she woke up. She heard it in the shower. She heard it while sitting at her desk at work, pretending to focus on emails while her hands were trembling under the keyboard. And that's when the decision locked in. Denise was going to that party. She was going to walk into that room full of relatives who forgot she existed. She was going to look her father in the eye one more time, and she was going to carry those screenshots on her phone like a loaded weapon she hoped she wouldn't have to use. But deep down, she already knew. She already knew how this was going to end. Because men like Marcus don't change when you whisper, and women like Lorraine don't crumble when you stay silent. Sometimes the truth has to be loud, and Denise was done being quiet. On the night of the party, Denise sat in her car outside the venue for 22 minutes. She counted every single one. The engine was off, the windows were up, the only sound was her own breathing and the muffled bass of music thumping from inside the building. She could see the lights through the windows. She could see silhouettes of people moving around, laughing, hugging, holding drinks. Family. Her family. At least, that's what they were supposed to be. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror. She'd gotten her hair done that morning. Fresh press, edges laid. She was wearing a black dress she bought 3 days ago. Not too flashy, not too plain. The kind of dress that says, "I didn't come here to impress you, but you're going to remember me." She put on her mother's gold earrings, the ones Teresa wore to her own graduation, the ones she gave Denise on her 18th birthday, and said, "Wear these when you need to remember who you come from." Denise touched them gently and closed her eyes. She picked up her phone, opened the screenshots one more time. She'd read them so many times over the past 2 weeks that she practically had them memorized. Every word, every emoji, every lie. She scrolled slowly. Lorene calling Marcus weak. Lorene admitting she got rid of that girl and her broke mother. Lorene laughing about it. Lorene talking about David from church like he was her real husband, and Marcus was just the one who paid the bills. Denise locked her phone and set it face down on the passenger seat. She stared at the building again. Her hands were trembling, not from cold, from everything, from 26 years of silence about to be broken in one night. She whispered to herself, "You don't have to do this," and she meant it. She could still drive away. She could go home, she could pour herself a glass of wine and watch a movie and pretend this family didn't exist the way they'd been pretending she didn't exist her whole life. Nobody inside that building was expecting her. Nobody would even notice she didn't come. That was the saddest part. She could disappear and not a single person in that room would ask where she went. But then she heard her mother's voice in her head. Not the gentle version, not the let God handle it version, the other one. The one Teresa used when Denise came home crying in 7th grade because a group of girls told her she was ugly and her hair was nappy and nobody would ever want her. Teresa knelt down, grabbed Denise by both shoulders, looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Baby, you are a lot of things, but you are not someone who runs. You hear me? You don't run." Denise opened her door. The night air hit her face and she stood up straight, adjusted her dress, picked up her phone and dropped it in her clutch, and she walked toward that front door like a woman who had already made peace with whatever was about to happen next. When she stepped inside, the energy hit her like a wave. Music playing, laughter everywhere, the smell of food. Catered. Lorene had gone all out. Of course she did. This wasn't just a birthday party. This was a performance. Lorene's specialty. A perfectly staged production designed to show the world what a beautiful, loving family she had built. White tablecloths, flower centerpieces, a giant banner that read, "Happy 60th Marcus" in gold and black letters. A photo slideshow playing on a screen in the corner showing pictures of Marcus through the years. Marcus and Lorene on their wedding day. Marcus holding baby Elijah. Marcus and Tiana at her prom. Family vacations. Christmases. Thanksgivings. Not a single picture of Denise. Not one. She stood near the entrance and scanned the room. She recognized some faces. Aunt Carol, who used to send $5 in a card every Christmas, until she just stopped one year without explanation. Uncle Richard, who once told Teresa at a funeral that Marcus did what was best for his real family. Cousins she played with as a child, who grew up and never once reached out to her. They were all here. Laughing, celebrating, living inside the version of this family that Lorene had carefully constructed. And then she saw him, Marcus, her father, standing near the head table with a glass in his hand. He looked older than she expected, grayer, heavier, but his smile was the same. That big, wide grin she used to dream about as a little girl, the one she used to imagine was meant for her. He was laughing at something someone said. Lorene was right beside him, of course, arm linked through his like a chain, not a gesture of love. She was wearing white. Denise almost laughed at that. White, like purity, like innocence. The audacity of this woman. Nobody noticed Denise first. She stood near the back, blending into the crowd the way she'd been blending into the margins of this family her whole life. Invisible, unimportant, present, but uncounted. And for a moment, she thought maybe she could just observe. Maybe she could just stand here and watch these people and feel whatever she needed to feel and then leave without saying a word. But then she felt the weight of her phone in her clutch, and something shifted. Not rage, something deeper than rage, something quieter, something that had been building inside her for 26 years and was finally done waiting. She didn't yell, she didn't curse, she didn't cry. She opened her clutch, she pulled out her phone, and she looked her father dead in the eyes and said 6 words that made Lorraine's smile disappear instantly. Do you want to hear the truth? The room was already silent, but when Denise said those 6 words, the silence changed. It went from the uncomfortable kind where people don't know what to say to the suffocating kind where people are afraid to breathe. Every single person in that room felt it. Something was about to happen that couldn't be taken back. Marcus looked at Denise's phone and then back at her face. He scoffed, that same dismissive laugh. What truth? What are you talking about? You need to leave before you embarrass yourself. But Denise didn't move. She didn't look away. She didn't shrink. For the first time in her entire life, she stood in front of her father and she didn't shrink. And that alone was enough to make him uncomfortable, because Marcus was used to Denise being small. He was used to her being quiet. He was used to her accepting whatever scraps he threw her way and disappearing back into the shadows without a fight. But the woman standing in front of him right now was not that girl anymore. That girl died about 30 seconds when he called her a mistake in front of everyone she ever wanted acceptance from. Denise's hands were steady now. That surprised him. Even her. The trembling was gone. The fear was gone. Something had taken its place. Not anger, not revenge. Clarity. The kind of clarity that comes only when you've been pushed so far past your breaking point that there's nothing left to lose. She unlocked her phone, opened the screenshots, and she looked up, not at Marcus, but at the room, at the 40 relatives who had been watching her get destroyed and said nothing. She looked at Aunt Carol, at Uncle Richard, at the cousins who forgot she existed. She looked at them all, and she said, I came here tonight because I wanted one thing, just one. I wanted my father to look at me and see me, not as a mistake, not as something he needed to move past, just as his daughter. That's all I ever wanted my entire life. But since he wants to stand here and call me a mistake in front of you all, then I think all of you deserve to know who's really been making mistakes in this family. Lorraine's arms uncrossed, her body stiffened. She took a step forward and said, Marcus, tell her to leave. She's causing a scene. But her voice was different now. The confidence was cracking. There was something underneath it that sounded a lot like panic. Denise turned to Lorraine and said, Don't worry, Lorraine. I'll start with you. And then she read the first text out loud. Girl, I've had that man wrapped around my finger since day one. He does whatever I tell him. All I had to do was get rid of that girl and her broke mother, and he fell right in line. The room shifted. You could feel it, physically, like the air pressure changed. A few of the aunts leaned forward. Uncle Richard put his drink down. Marcus's face went from annoyed to confused. He turned to Lorraine. Lorraine's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Denise kept going. She read the next message, the one where Lorraine admitted to intercepting the cards and letters Marcus had tried to send Denise when she was a child, the birthday cards Denise never received, the letters she never read, the attempts Marcus made in the early years before Lorraine convinced him to stop trying altogether. Denise read Lorraine's own words out loud and watched her father's face change in real time. The arrogance melting, the certainty dissolving, something horrible dawning behind his eyes. The realization that the story he'd been living inside for 20 years might not be the real story at all. She told you my mother was turning you against you, Denise said, looking directly at Marcus now. My mother never said a single bad word about you. Not once. Not one time in 26 years. She told me to respect you. She told me to pray for you. She told me not to carry bitterness. And this whole time, your wife was the one making sure you never came back. Marcus lifted at Lorraine. His voice was low, and it cracked when he spoke. Is that true? Lorraine's composure shattered. She started stumbling over her words. She's lying, Marcus. That girl is lying. She's always been jealous of what we have. You know that. You know she's always wanted to destroy this family. But her voice was too fast, too desperate, and everyone in that room could hear it. The panic, the guilt leaking through every syllable. Denise didn't stop. She couldn't now. The dam was broken and 26 years of silence were pouring out, and nothing on earth was going to hold them back. She read the texts where Lorraine talked about Marcus behind his back, called him weak, called him easy to manipulate, called him a puppet. She read every word slowly, clearly, loud enough for every person in that room to hear, and with every sentence, Marcus seemed physically shrink. The big man with the big laugh and the big voice who stood in the center of his party like a king 5 minutes ago was now standing with his shoulders dropped and his mouth slightly open, looking at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. And then Denise delivered the final blow. She paused, took a breath, looked at Lorraine, who was now visibly shaking, tears running down her face, mascara smudging, that perfect image she spent decades building, crumbling in real time in front of the very people she built it for. Denise said, "And since we're telling the truth tonight, Lorraine, why don't we talk about David?" The name hit the room like a grenade. Lorraine gasped. Actually gasped. Her hand went to her chest like the wind had been knocked out of her, and Denise knew in that moment that she had the one thing Lorraine never expected anyone to have, the one secret Lorraine thought was buried so deep that it would never see daylight. She read the texts about the affair, the messages where Lorraine talked about David from church, the man she'd been seeing for years behind Marcus's back, the casual way she described it to Pamela, the laughing emojis, the way she talked about Marcus like he was just a cover story, a prop in the life she was performing for everyone, going to church on Sunday morning with her husband while spending Thursday nights with another man, raising her hands in worship while living a double life that would make the devil himself uncomfortable. The room erupted, not in shouting, in chaos, the kind of chaos that happens when everything people believe to be true collapses at the same time. Aunt Carol stood up from her chair with her hand over her mouth. Uncle Richard turned to his wife and said, "I knew it. I always knew something was off." Cousins were whispering. Some were pulling out their own phones. One of Lorraine's friends, who was sitting near the back, quietly picked up her purse and headed for the door like she wanted no part of what was coming next. Marcus turned to Lorraine. His eyes were wet. Not crying yet, but right on the edge. The kind of wet that comes right before a man's entire world falls apart, and he realizes he's a fool. He said her name once, just once, Lorraine. And the way he said it carried everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the years he gave her, the daughter he abandoned because she told him to, the life he thought was real that turned out to be a stage set by a woman who never respected him enough to tell him the truth. Then Denise delivered the final blow. She paused, took a breath, looked at Lorraine, who was now visibly shaking, tears running down her face, mascara smudging, that perfect image she spent decades building, crumbling in real time in front of the very people she built it for. Denise said, "And since we're telling the truth tonight, Lorraine, why don't we talk about David?" The name hit the room like a grenade. Lorraine gasped. Actually gasped. Her hand went to her chest like the wind had been knocked out of her, and Denise knew in that moment that she had the one thing Lorraine never expected anyone to have, the one secret Lorraine thought was buried so deep that it would never see daylight. She read the texts about the affair, the messages where Lorraine talked about David from church, the man she'd been seeing for years behind Marcus's back, the casual way she described it to Pamela, the laughing emojis, the way she talked about Marcus like he was just a cover story, a prop in the life she was performing for everyone, going to church on Sunday morning with her husband while spending Thursday nights with another man, raising her hands in worship while living a double life that would make the devil himself uncomfortable. The room erupted, not in shouting, in chaos, the kind of chaos that happens when everything people believe to be true collapses at the same time. Aunt Carol stood up from her chair with her hand over her mouth. Uncle Richard turned to his wife and said, "I knew it. I always knew something was off." Cousins were whispering. Some were pulling out their own phones. One of Lorraine's friends, who was sitting near the back, quietly picked up her purse and headed for the door like she wanted no part of what was coming next. Marcus turned to Lorraine. His eyes were wet. Not crying yet, but right on the edge. The kind of wet that comes right before a man's entire world falls apart, and he realizes he's a fool. He said her name once, just once, Lorraine. And the way he said it carried everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the years he gave her, the daughter he abandoned because she told him to, the life he thought was real that turned out to be a stage set by a woman who never respected him enough to tell him the truth. Then Denise delivered the final blow. She paused, took a breath, looked at Lorraine, who was now visibly shaking, tears running down her face, mascara smudging, that perfect image she spent decades building, crumbling in real time in front of the very people she built it for. Denise said, "And since we're telling the truth tonight, Lorraine, why don't we talk about David?" The name hit the room like a grenade. Lorraine gasped. Actually gasped. Her hand went to her chest like the wind had been knocked out of her, and Denise knew in that moment that she had the one thing Lorraine never expected anyone to have, the one secret Lorraine thought was buried so deep that it would never see daylight. She read the texts about the affair, the messages where Lorraine talked about David from church, the man she'd been seeing for years behind Marcus's back, the casual way she described it to the laughing emojis, the way she talked about Marcus as if he was just a cover story, a prop in the life she was performing for everyone. Going to church on Sunday morning with her husband while spending Thursday nights with another man. Raising her hands in worship while living a double life that would make the devil himself uncomfortable. The room erupted. Not in shouting, in chaos. The kind of chaos that happens when everything people believe to be true collapses at the same time. Aunt Carol stood up from her chair with her hand over her mouth. Uncle Richard turned to his wife and said, "I knew it. I always knew something was off." Cousins were whispering. Some were pulling out their own phones. One of Lorraine's friends, who was sitting near the back, quietly picked up her purse and headed for the door like she wanted no part of what was coming next. Marcus turned to Lorraine. His eyes were wet. Not crying yet, but right on the edge. The kind of wet that comes right before a man's entire world falls apart and he realizes he's a fool. He said her name once, just once, Lorraine. And the way he said it carried everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the years he gave her, the daughter he abandoned because she told him to, the life he thought was real that turned out to be a stage set built by a woman who never respected him enough to tell him the truth. Lorraine tried one last time. She pointed at Denise and screamed, "You did this. You came here to destroy my family. This is exactly why Marcus never wanted you. This is exactly why you were a mistake." And that word again, mistake, hanging in the air like a curse. But this time it didn't land the same way. This time it didn't cut. Because everyone in that room was looking at Lorraine now, and they weren't seeing a devoted wife and mother. They were seeing a woman exposed, a woman who lied and manipulated and cheated, and then had the nerve to call someone else a mistake. Denise looked at Lorraine and said something so quietly that people in the back of the room had to lean in to hear it. She said, "I might be his mistake, Lorraine, but you were his punishment." The room went completely still. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, and for the first time in 26 years, Denise didn't feel invisible. Denise stood there for a moment longer than she needed to. Not because she wanted to watch Lorraine fall apart, not because she wanted to see the look on her father's face, but because she needed to feel it. She needed to stand in that room as a woman who finally told the truth and let it sit in her bones for just a second before she walked away. She'd spent 26 years being the one who absorbed the pain, the one who stayed quiet, the one who left the room so everyone else could be comfortable. She needed this moment, not for revenge, for herself. She looked around the room one last time. Aunt Carol was sitting down with tears rolling down her face, shaking her head slowly like she was replaying every holiday, every birthday, every family event, and realizing that the little girl who used to show up with the shy smile and the hopeful eyes was never treated the way she should have been. Uncle Richard wouldn't make eye contact with Denise. He just stared at the floor. Maybe because he remembered what he said to Teresa at that funeral years ago about Marcus doing what's best for his real family. Maybe that sentence was sitting in his chest now with a weight it didn't have before. The cousins who never called, who never checked in, who never once asked how Denise was doing, were all frozen in their seats like statues built from guilt. And Marcus, her father, the man who gave her life and then spent the rest of his life trying to forget that he did. He was sitting down now. Someone had pulled a chair over for him because his legs gave out. He wasn't looking at Lorraine. He wasn't looking at Denise. He was looking at nothing, staring straight ahead with his hands on his knees like a man who just woke up from a 20-year dream and realized it was a nightmare the whole time. Lorraine was in the corner. Two of her friends were standing near her, but not too close, like they wanted to seem supportive, but didn't actually want to be associated with what just happened. Lorraine was crying, loud, messy, desperate crying, the kind that comes when you've lost control of everything you spent your whole life controlling. She kept saying, "It's not what it looks like," over and over, but nobody was listening anymore. The mask was off. The performance was over. And the audience she'd been performing to her entire marriage was now looking at her with the one thing she feared more than anything: the truth. Denise closed her clutch. She didn't slam it. She didn't make a dramatic gesture. She just closed it quietly, the way you close a book when you finish the last chapter. She took one step back from the center of the room, then another. She wasn't running, she wasn't rushing, she was leaving the way she should have been welcomed, with dignity. But before she reached the door, Tiana stepped forward, and what Tiana did next broke the room open in a completely different way. Tiana walked right up to Denise, in front of everyone, in front of her mother, in front of her father, in front of 40 relatives who were watching this family unravel in real time. And she hugged her. Not a quick, polite hug, a real one. The kind where you hold on tight and close your eyes and say with your body what words can't carry. She held Denise and whispered in her ear, "You are not a mistake. You never were." Denise broke right there. The tears she'd been holding back since she walked through that front door finally came. Not the painful kind she was used to, not the lonely kind she cried alone on the edge of her bed at midnight. These were different. These were the tears of a woman being held by someone who chose her, someone who saw the truth and didn't look away, someone who could have stayed loyal to the lie and protected her mother's image, but instead picked up the phone and called the sister she barely knew because it was the right thing to do. Elijah, Marcus and Lorraine's son, stood near the back of the room. He hadn't said a word the entire night. He looked conflicted, torn, like he didn't know which version of his family to believe anymore. He didn't come forward, and Denise didn't expect him to. Some people need time to process the collapse of everything they thought they knew. Denise understood that. She didn't need everyone in that room to validate her. She just needed one person, and Tiana was enough. Denise pulled back from the hug and wiped her eyes. She looked at Tiana and said, "Thank you." 2 words, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. Thank you for calling me that night. Thank you for telling me the truth. Thank you for choosing me when nobody else ever did. Then Denise turned toward the door one final time, and as she did, she looked at Marcus. Their eyes met, and for a split second, she saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Not anger, not annoyance, not that dismissive look she'd memorized over the years. She saw regret. Deep, gutting, irreversible regret. The kind that doesn't come with words because there are no big words enough. He opened his mouth slightly, like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. And Denise didn't wait for it. She'd spent 26 years waiting for words from that man. She was done waiting. She walked out. The night air hit her face the same way it did when she got out of her car earlier that evening. But it felt different now, lighter, like something that had been sitting on her chest for as long as she could remember had finally been lifted. Not all of it. Healing doesn't work that way. You don't carry a wound for 26 years and walk away clean in one night. But the bleeding had stopped. For the first time in her life, the bleeding had stopped. She got in her car, sat down, closed the door, and she called her mother. Teresa picked up on the second ring, like Teresa always did, because Teresa was the kind of mother who always picked up. Always, no matter what time it was, no matter what she was doing. When Denise called, Teresa answered. That was the one constant in Denise's entire life, the one thing that never changed, the one love that had no conditions. Denise didn't tell her everything right away. She just said, "Mama, I did something tonight." And Teresa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you okay, baby?" And Denise thought about that question. Really thought about it. Not the automatic, "I'm fine," she usually gave. She sat with it. And then she said something she hadn't been able to say honestly in a long time. "Yeah, Mama, I think I am." Teresa let out a breath, a long, slow breath that sounded like it had been held for 26 years. And she said, "Then that's all that matters." They sat on the phone together in silence for a while. Not awkward silence, the kind of silence that only exists between two people who have been through everything together and don't need words to prove it. Denise looked at herself in the rearview mirror, same face, same eyes, same gold earrings her mother gave her, but something was different. Something behind her eyes had shifted. The question that used to live there, the one that followed her from childhood, through adolescence, through every lonely night and every empty holiday and every unanswered phone call, was gone. Why wasn't I enough? She didn't need the answer anymore, because the question was never hers to carry in the first place. It was never about what she lacked. It was about what they chose. Her father chose comfort over courage, Lorraine chose control over compassion, and the family chose silence over truth. None of that had anything to do with Denise's worth. None of it ever did. In the weeks that followed, things unraveled, the way things unravel when the truth finally gets air. Marcus and Lorraine separated, not quietly. The family that Lorraine had spent 2 decades staging like a photograph fell apart the way things fall apart when the foundation was never real to begin with. Marcus tried to reach out to Denise. He called twice. The first time she didn't answer. The second time she did. He didn't apologize right away. He just breathed into the phone for a long time and then said, "I don't know how to fix this." And Denise said, "I don't know if you can." It wasn't cruel. It was honest, and for the first time in their relationship, honesty was on the table instead of hidden under years of someone else's lies. They weren't okay. They might never be okay, but the wall that Lorraine built between them was gone now, and whatever happened next, at least it would be real. At least it would be built on truth, not manipulation. At least Denise would never again have to wonder if her father's absence was her fault. It wasn't. It was never hers. Tiana and Denise stayed in touch. They talked every week, sometimes about heavy things, sometimes about nothing. Sometimes Tiana would send her a meme at 2 a.m, and Denise would laugh out loud alone in her apartment and think about how strange life is. How the sister she never got to know ended up being the one who handed her the key to her own freedom. How the person raised inside the lie was the one brave enough to break it open. Denise went back to therapy. She'd gone before, but always held back, always kept the deepest wounds locked away, because saying them out loud made them too real. But now she said them, all of them. She talked about the birthday cards that never came, the Facebook posts she wasn't in, the cologne that used to make her feel safe, The word mistake and how it lived in her body like a second heartbeat for as long as she could remember. She talked, and her therapist listened, and slowly, carefully, painfully, Denise began to separate who she was from what was done to her. And one night, about 3 months after the party, Denise was sitting on... She sat on her couch in her apartment. It was quiet. No TV, no music, just her and the stillness. She looked at her phone and opened her father's contact. His name just sat there on the screen. Marcus. She didn't call. She didn't text. She just looked at it. And then she did something she'd never done before. She changed the contact name. She deleted Marcus and typed 2 words. My father. Not because he earned it, not because he deserved it, but because she was tired of pretending he didn't exist the way he pretended she didn't exist. He was her father. That was a fact. It didn't mean he was a good one. It didn't mean she owed him forgiveness on his timeline. It just meant she was done running from the truth of her own story. She put the phone down, leaned back, and closed her eyes. And for the first time in 26 years, the silence in her apartment didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. Because here's what nobody tells you about being called a mistake. The word only has power if you believe it. And Denise spent most of her life believing it. Believing that she was too much and not enough at the same time. Believing that if she had been different, somehow prettier, somehow quieter, somehow less of a reminder of a past her father wanted to forget, then maybe he would have stayed. Maybe he would have loved her. Maybe she would have been in those pictures on the slideshow. Maybe she would have been enough. But the truth she learned that night, standing in a room full of people who should have protected her, is that she was enough. She was enough when her father refused to see it. She was enough when Lorraine tried to erase her. She was enough when 40 relatives sat in silence and let a grown man call his own child a mistake without saying a single word. She was enough. She was always enough. And the ones who couldn't see it, that was never her burden to carry. Not anymore.